what does it truly take to enter the world of old money? We imagine sacrifices of time, perhaps even health.
But for one of the most powerful dynasties of our time, the Murdochs, the cost was far steeper. This is the story of a $19 billion media empire and how it was built on, in a single word, scandal. I'm Beatrice, and together we're going to peek behind the curtain, and what a curtain it is. Woven from threads of pure gold and old-world luxury. This is the world Rupert Murdoch meticulously crafted, a world where home isn't just a place to live, but a statement of power. Imagine a $57 million triplex penthouse floating above Manhattan, where floor-to-ceiling windows don't just frame the city, they possess it. Then picture a $28 million estate in Bel Air, a sprawling private kingdom complete with its own vineyard. For travel, forget first class. We're talking about an $84 million G650 private jet to shrink the globe, and for the sea, a $150 million super yacht, a floating palace for the modern pharaoh. This taste for the sublime wasn't just his, it became a birthright, passed down to his children, like his son Lachlan's renowned collection of priceless cars. It's a breathtaking picture, isn't it? A portrait of dynastic success, carefully curated and presented to the world. A masterpiece of a life. But if you look closer, right at the edges of the canvas, you start to notice the shadows, the places where the paint is just a little too thick. Because this idyllic image, this untouchable facade, it hides the story of how it was truly made. And that story begins not with gold, but with grit, ambition, and a father's unyielding expectation. That expectation was forged not in boardrooms, but generations before, in the quiet, windswept parishes of 19th century Scotland. The Murdoch name didn't begin with wealth, it began with respect. Rupert's great-grandfather, Patrick, was a clergyman, a man of God who moved his family to Australia, carrying with him a strong moral compass, but very little capital. It was his son, Keith, Rupert's father, who would become the true architect of the family's relentless ambition. He grew up on the periphery of Melbourne's high society, a world of sprawling gardens and whispered invitations he never received. He could see their grand homes from a distance, hear the faint music from their parties on a warm evening, but he was always on the outside looking in. This wasn't just the absence of money, it was a constant, stinging reminder of the power of status, a deep, formative lesson in the loneliness of being an outsider. Compounding this feeling was a cruel, intensely personal obstacle, a severe stammer. Imagine a young man whose mind raced with observations and arguments, desperate to make his mark, but trapped behind a frustrating wall of his own words. Every public sentence was a hurdle, a moment of potential humiliation that could have easily pushed him into the shadows. But for Keith, it did the opposite. It forged an ironclad will. He forced himself into the one career that seemed impossible, journalism, a profession built entirely on the power of the spoken and written word. That relentless drive found its ultimate stage during the First World War. As a young journalist visiting the front lines, Keith was horrified by the catastrophic failure of the Gallipoli campaign. He defied military censors, risking his entire future to write a searing 8,000-word letter that exposed the brutal truth. It was more than a scoop. It was his first real taste of how words, properly wielded, could bend the arc of history. A lesson he would never, ever forget. From that moment, his rise was meteoric. Chief editor, newspaper magnate, a quiet kingmaker in Australian politics. Keith Murdoch finally achieved the financial security and influence he had craved his entire life. And in 1931, he had a son, an heir, Rupert, to whom he would pass on not just an empire of paper and ink, but something far more potent, that same insatiable hunger of the outsider who had finally broken down the door and was now determined to own the entire house. But where Keith had used his power to quietly influence from the inside, Rupert was about to kick the door off its hinges for everyone to see. When his father passed away, Rupert inherited the family business at just 21 years old, and he immediately began writing a new gospel of journalism. It was loud, confrontational, and often unapologetically vulgar.
While the old guard clutched their pearls, Rupert had discovered a profound market inefficiency. Millions of people felt completely ignored by the refined elite media. His entire strategy could be boiled down to a simple, powerful idea: give those people a voice, news of the world, and transformed the Sun into a tabloid titan. It was a shock to the system, a splash of cold water on a culture of polite deference. But for the British working class, it was a paper that finally spoke their language. He then took that same blueprint to America. He made the New York Post notorious and profitable with a diet of salacious scandal journalism. But his true masterstroke was in television. Rupert's genius was realizing he couldn't beat the three major networks at their own game, so he didn't even try. He launched the Fox network by once again targeting the audiences everyone else pretended didn't exist. He gave them The Simpsons, a satirical portrait of a dysfunctional family that felt more real to millions than any polished sitcom. He gave them In Living Color, a show with a comedic edge and cultural voice that the establishment wasn't quite ready for. He saw the future, moving early into cable with Fox News and even buying MySpace for over $500 million. He had crafted a masterclass in disruption. He found the outsiders, the rebels, the forgotten, and built an empire by giving them a home. He had amassed unimaginable power. But a question began to loom, one that would come to define his entire legacy. With that kind of power, where do you draw the line? It turned out there was no line. At the absolute peak of his... But a question began to loom, one that would come to define his entire legacy. With that kind of power, where do you draw the line? It turned out there was no line. At the absolute peak of his power, the question of morality wasn't just ignored, it was displaced. And in its place, something rotten began to grow, something that would tarnish the Murdoch name forever. In a word, scandal. The first explosion came from his British tabloid, News of the World. For years, the paper had been using private investigators to illegally hack into the voicemails of public figures. But the true horror was not in who they targeted, but in how far they would go. Their targets weren't just politicians or celebrities. They were the families of dead soldiers. They were the victims of terrorist attacks. And most unforgivably, they were the family of a 13-year-old murdered schoolgirl named Millie Dowler. While her parents were... And most unforgivably, they were the family of a 13-year-old murdered schoolgirl named Millie Dowler. While her parents waited by the phone, desperate for any sign of life, reporters were hacking into her voicemail. They even deleted messages to make room for new ones, giving her family a brief, agonizing flicker of false hope that she was still alive. The public indignation was tidal. The 168-year-old newspaper was forced to shut down in disgrace. And when Rupert Murdoch was called before a parliamentary committee, he was accused of willful blindness,
a damning verdict on a man who had built his empire on knowing everything. But this wasn't an isolated incident. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of rot was festering within the walls of Fox News.
For decades, a toxic culture of harassment, spearheaded by its powerful CEO Roger Ailes, had been allowed to thrive. It was a world of secret settlements and ironclad non-disclosure agreements designed to buy the silence of countless women. The dam finally broke when anchor Gretchen Carlson came forward. But nothing showcases the company's priorities more clearly than the case of its biggest star, Bill O'Reilly. After it was revealed that he and the company had paid an astonishing $32 million to settle a single harassment claim, what did Fox do? They renewed his contract. The message was clear: ratings were more valuable than humanity. These scandals were more than just PR crises. They were the symptom of a much deeper disease.
An empire built on giving a voice to the forgotten had become a machine for silencing the vulnerable. This is the ultimate danger of a media monopoly. It's not just about controlling the news, it's about the power to warp reality, to shield the guilty, and to launch an all-out assault on the very idea of a shared truth. And this assault on truth didn't just play out on the world stage, it tore the family apart from the inside. The most visible fracture was between Rupert and his son James. For years, James had wrestled with the company's ethical direction, but the final breaking point was the empire's dismissive stance on climate change. It was a public rebuke, a son breaking with his father over the very soul of the business.
In 2020, he made his dissent permanent, resigning from the News Court board and effectively walking away from the line of succession. He chose his conscience over his inheritance. This pattern of turbulence wasn't confined to the boardroom. It was a mirror of Rupert's personal life, a series of high-profile marriages and costly divorces that were as multifaceted and volatile as his media empire. It revealed a life where loyalty was often temporary and relationships seemed almost transactional. And perhaps this was by design. The story of the Murdochs, which so famously inspired the show Succession, is rooted in a simple, brutal dynamic. Rupert didn't raise his children to be a team, he bred them to be rivals. He pitted them against one another in a lifelong contest for his approval and his crown.
The collateral damage wasn't just a few scandals, it was the family itself. And so, in September of 2023, the final act of this family drama began. At 92 years old, Rupert Murdoch announced he was stepping down, passing the crown of his empire to his eldest son, Lachlan. The king was gone. Long live the king. Lachlan, the loyal son who had stood by his father through every storm, was now the sole chairman of News Corp and the new CEO of Fox. On the surface, the succession was complete, but here's the twist, worthy of an HBO finale. Lachlan may hold the scepter, but his power rests on a knife's edge. The true control of the empire lies within something called the Murdoch Family Trust. And upon Rupert's death, the voting power in that trust splits equally between his 4 eldest children, Lachlan, James, Elizabeth, and Prudence. Think about that. The rebel son, James, who publicly walked away on principle, will have the exact same say as the new king. Suddenly, the chessboard is reset. You have Lachlan, the defender of the old guard. You have James, the progressive exile, armed with a powerful motive to change things from within. And you have the 2 sisters, Elizabeth and Prudence, who have largely stayed out of the fray, but now hold the decisive swing votes. Their alliance could crown or dethrone a monarch. While most analysts believe Lachlan will consolidate his power, the stage is set for the ultimate season of succession, this time for real. The question is no longer who will win, But what that victory will even look like? With a new generation at the helm, will the Murdoch legacy be a story of continuation or a story of reckoning? We've journeyed through the empires of Musk, Bezos, and now the Murdochs. This exploration into the hidden stories of wealth and power is something we build together. So I'm curious, whose world should we step into next? Please leave your ideas in the comments below. I truly value hearing from you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time.